I was standing in my living room staring at a TV remote on the floor, and I couldn't pick it up. Not because I didn't want to, because I wasn't sure I could get back up. At 94 years old, you start doing quiet math like that. If I bend down, will I make it back up without falling? So I just stood there, looking at it, like it belonged to someone else. And that's when it hit me. I had been lying for years, not to strangers, not to doctors, to everyone who ever asked me one simple question: how are you doing? I'm fine. I said that so many times it stopped meaning anything. I said it when I was tired. I said it when I felt weak. I said it when something didn't feel right in my body. I even said it after my husband passed. My daughter would call and ask, "Mom, are you okay?" I'm fine. Short answer, clean. No follow-up questions. That's the part I liked. I didn't want to explain things. I didn't want to sound like I needed help. And I definitely didn't want anyone thinking I couldn't handle my own life. I spent most of my adult years being the reliable one. I paid bills on time. I showed up. I didn't complain. So when things started changing slowly, quietly, I kept that same habit. Just say you're fine and move on. But here's what happens when you do that long enough. People believe you. They stop asking twice. They stop checking in. Not because they don't care, but because you told them not to. And little by little, your world gets smaller without anyone noticing, including you. That remote stayed on the floor longer than I'd like to admit. Not because I couldn't physically reach it, but because something in me didn't trust the next move. And standing there in a quiet room with nothing but the TV still talking to itself, I realized something I hadn't said out loud in years. I wasn't fine. I kept standing there a little longer than I should have, then finally leaned on the arm of the couch and reached down slowly. That small moment stayed with me not because of the remote, but because I knew exactly how I got there. It wasn't one big mistake. It was years of putting things off. I used to be good at handling things. That's what I told myself. But the truth is, I got very comfortable saying I'll deal with it later. Later this week. Later this month. Next time I see them. There was a friend of mine, Carol. We used to talk every couple of weeks. Nothing dramatic. Just checking in. One day she left me a message. I heard it. I just didn't call back right away. I figured I'd get to it. A few days passed, then a week. Then it felt a little awkward, so I waited longer. By the time I finally picked up the phone, her daughter answered. Carol had passed. And there's no good way to explain that feeling when you realize you didn't run out of time. You just assumed you had more of it. That wasn't the only time. There were things I meant to fix, conversations I kept postponing, small problems I told myself weren't urgent. I treated time like it was something I could schedule around, and I did the same thing with my own body. I remember noticing little changes, getting tired earlier in the day, feeling a bit unsteady when I stood up too fast. Nothing dramatic, just small things. And every time I had the same answer ready. That's just getting older. I didn't ask questions. I didn't bring it up to anyone. I didn't change anything. Because it wasn't serious. Not yet. That's how it works. It's never serious until it is. There was one afternoon in my kitchen not long after my husband passed, when I sat down at the table and realized I had been there longer than usual. I tried to stand up, and I couldn't do it without pushing off the table with both hands. I remember pausing halfway up, feeling my legs shake just enough to notice. That wasn't sudden. That didn't happen overnight. That was built slowly out of every time I chose to wait instead of act. I stayed there for a second, holding on to the edge of the table, pretending that was normal. That's the thing about living alone. There's no one there to say, hey, that didn't look right. After my husband passed, the house didn't feel sad the way people expect. It just felt quiet. No one asking what I wanted for dinner. No one turning the TV down. No small conversations filling the space. At first I told myself I was doing fine. Same line, same habit. But the truth is, when nobody's around, your standards start to slip in ways you don't notice right away. I stopped cooking real meals, not all at once, just little changes. One night it was soup from a can. Another night it was a frozen dinner. Then it turned into eating standing up at the counter because I didn't feel like setting the table for one person. Some days I'd realize it was 3 p.m. and I hadn't eaten anything yet. And I knew that wasn't good. I'm not that clueless. But knowing something and fixing it are two different things. My daughter would call. Mom, did you eat? Yeah, I'm fine. There it was again. I didn't want to hear concern in her voice. I didn't want to feel like I needed checking on, so I kept things simple. Short answers, no details. The less I said, the easier it was to keep everything looking under control. But it wasn't. There was one morning I reached for a coffee mug in the cabinet, and I felt a slight wobble. Not a fall, just enough to make me grab the counter. I stood there for a second, hand flat on the surface, waiting for that feeling to pass. And instead of thinking, maybe I should tell someone, my first thought was, don't make this a big deal. That was my pattern. Minimize it, ignore it, move on. I wasn't trying to be reckless. I just didn't want my life to change. Because once you admit something's wrong, things start shifting. People step in. Decisions get made. And I wasn't ready for that. So I kept everything to myself. Handled it on my own. Or at least that's what I told myself while I held on to counters, slowed down my steps, and quietly adjusted to a life that was getting smaller without asking me first. I looked at that remote again later that evening, still on the floor, and this time I didn't even try right away. That was new. There was a point in my life when I wouldn't have thought twice. Bend down, pick it up, move on. No hesitation, no planning. Now I was thinking about angles, balance, what I could grab onto if something went wrong. That's when it stopped feeling like a small problem. It wasn't about the remote anymore. It was about trust. I didn't trust my legs. I didn't trust the next movement. So I stood there weighing it like it was some kind of decision. And eventually, I did something I avoided for years. I picked up the phone. Not because I wanted help, because I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. When my daughter answered, I didn't give her the usual line. I just said, I need a little help. There was a pause on the other end. Not panic. Not surprise, just quiet, like she'd been waiting to hear that for a long time. That night didn't fix everything. I didn't suddenly become a different person. The next morning, I still woke up stiff. I still had to sit on the edge of the bed before standing. I still caught myself reaching for the easy option when it came to food. But something shifted. Not in my body, in my decisions. I started small because that's all I could manage. Instead of pushing myself up with both hands, I tried using less support. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough to notice. I walked from the kitchen to the hallway and back. No timer, no plan, just a few steps once or twice a day. I made one real meal, not fancy, just something warm that took more effort than a microwave. And some days I didn't do any of that. There were mornings I went right back to old habits, ate standing up, skipped the effort, told myself it didn't matter. That part didn't disappear. But now I noticed it, and noticing it made it harder to ignore. I wasn't fixing my life. I sat down after that call and stayed there longer than I planned, not moving, just thinking about how simple all of it looked from the outside. For most of my life, I didn't think of myself as someone who made big mistakes. I paid my bills. I showed up. I didn't cause problems. But that's not where the real damage was. The real damage was in the small things I kept doing over and over, saying I'm fine when I wasn't, waiting to deal with something that already needed attention, ignoring what my body was trying to tell me. None of those felt serious in the moment. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't interrupt your life. They quietly shape it. And the longer you repeat them, the more normal they feel. I didn't wake up one day unable to trust my legs. I didn't suddenly become someone who needed help. I got there step by step, choice by choice, mostly by doing nothing when I should have done something. That's the part people don't like to hear, because it means the fix isn't dramatic either. You don't correct a lifetime of small mistakes with one big decision. You correct them the same way they were built, small repeated changes. I started noticing when I said I'm fine too quickly. I started catching myself when I wanted to delay something simple. I paid attention when my body felt off instead of brushing it aside. Not perfectly, not every day, but enough to change the direction. That's what most people misunderstand. You don't need to fix everything. You just need to stop repeating what you already know isn't working. And once you see that clearly, it becomes harder to ignore it the next time it shows up. I caught myself reaching for the easy answer again the next day and stopped mid-sentence. That's how it shows up, not in big moments, in small ones you almost miss. Most people think they'll change when something serious happens, a diagnosis, a fall, a loss. That's what I used to think too. But by the time something serious happens, you're not starting from zero. You're starting from years of habits that already pushed you in that direction. So if there's anything I can tell you from where I'm sitting now, it's this. Don't wait for a big moment to fix a small problem. If there's someone you've been meaning to call, call them. Not because it's urgent, but because it won't feel easier later. If your body is telling you something feels off, pay attention now. Not when it becomes a real issue. If you've been trying to handle everything on your own, ask for help before you actually need it. That part is harder than it sounds, because asking for help feels like losing control. But what I learned is refusing help doesn't keep you independent. It just makes things harder until you don't have a choice anymore. And the small things matter more than people think. A regular meal, a short walk, standing up without using your hands, even if it takes a few tries. None of that looks impressive, but those are the things that decide how your life feels day to day. I didn't change everything. I still have days where I take the easier option, days where I ignore what I already know. But now I notice it sooner, and that gives me a chance to do something about it before it turns into another year of the same mistake. That's really all this comes down to. Not perfection, just catching yourself a little earlier than you did before. I looked around my house later that evening, the same place I've lived in for years, and realized how little of it actually mattered the way I once thought it did. There was a time I cared about keeping everything in order. Bills paid on time, house clean, everything where it should be, and I did all of that. But none of those things are what I think about now. What stays with me are the things I didn't do, the conversations I delayed, the times I said, "I'm fine," instead of being honest, the moments I ignored myself because it was easier than dealing with it. That's what sticks. People talk about living longer like it's a goal on its own, but living longer doesn't fix anything if you keep carrying the same habits with you. You just repeat them for more years. What I understand now is that most of what actually matters isn't complicated. It's not about doing something impressive. It's about being clear. Clear about how you feel. Clear about what needs attention. Clear about when something isn't working anymore. That kind of clarity would have saved me a lot of time. Not in the sense of adding more years, but in making the years I already had easier. Because the truth is, you don't run out of time all at once. You use it up slowly. Every time you wait. Every time you avoid something small. Every time you tell yourself it can be handled later. I used to think I had time to circle back and fix things. Now I see it differently. You don't circle back. You either deal with it when it shows up or you carry it forward. And after enough time, carrying it forward becomes your life. At 94, I'm not trying to rebuild everything. I'm just trying to be more honest in the moments that are still in front of me. And that starts with not pretending things are fine when they're not.